Hi and welcome to LawWiser. As you're aware, with this pandemic, there is also rising concern when it comes to data protection. Companies today are working remotely, and this is also raising concerns for compliances with respect to data protection. Today, we have with us Ms. Ojasvita Srivastava, General Counsel, Securitas AMEA. She's here to guide us on the data protection laws in the AMEA region.
Hi, Sanya. Thank you for having me here. I think it's very important to understand and talk about data protection laws right now and compliances with data protection laws, especially given that because of COVID-19, there is a lot of remote working happening. There's a lot of data being collected. There's a lot of data being stored and being accessed from different locations. This makes us all the more, vulnerable to violations of data protection laws. I think the focus that was there on data protection laws has increased, and COVID-19 has actually helped us move forward in that direction. I'm very glad that India has finally, moved in that direction, and hopefully we will have this new law in place to make sure that we have an equally robust data protection laws as the rest of the region.
So, if you could guide us on the evolving data protection laws in India.
Of course, it all started with GDPR in May 2018. That's when I think the world woke up to such strict compliance with data protection laws. Uh, it has gone in the right direction in India, I would say. Our data protection law is not as strict as the GDPR, but it pretty much covers the majority of the requirements from the point of view of an individual and the obligations of organizations on how we're handling it. It's similar, but not exactly the same. As far as requirements of permissions or transferring of data outside of India, outside of the region where we are is concerned, the laws are somewhat similar, but not as strict and as stringent in, say, Singapore or in Hong Kong, or for that matter, even Thailand, which is much less strict as compared to, say, Singapore. Overall, I want to give you, we need to have this discussion in the context or in the background that because of COVID-19, there's a lot of remote working that is happening. A lot of people are working outside of their offices. A lot of collaboration is happening online. A lot of data is being collected as a result of that, and that needs to be stored somewhere. Most big organizations that I know already have well-established data centers for the region. Like they have a data center that they're either taking from an organization or they have their own data centers, but very often they are located outside India. So the question arises, what happens when you're taking personal data of somebody outside of India? So those are the kind of aspects that we need to be compliant with. Of course, our Indian data protection law is not yet in force, but it will be very soon. So when you are, as an organization, looking at the data protection compliance, you have to, of course, take into consideration that you will be compliant with the future law that's going to come in. In most of the data protection laws in the region, the strictest compliance that you have is that wherever you are taking the data of an individual, whether it's an employee or a client, you can take it either with the permission of the particular person, or you can take it to a jurisdiction where there is such a strict data protection law as is there in the home jurisdiction. So if you want to take away the data of, say, somebody from Singapore to a data center that is, say, in Hong Kong, in that case, you need to make sure that Hong Kong has a data protection law that is as strict and as stringent as Singapore. So those sort of requirements are there. They are not there under the Indian law, under the proposed Indian data protection law. We have either the express permission of the person who's concerned, or there is a requirement on the law if it's sensitive personal data relating to things like genetic information and political beliefs and religion and caste and all of that. So that sort of data you cannot take out. But other than that, with the permission of the particular person, you can take the data of an Indian citizen to pretty much anywhere in the world. So that is something that one needs to look at as an organization. When you're looking at a region as a whole where you have several countries and you have to make sure that you are compliant with data protection laws, you need to look at what are the requirements, compliances under each of the data protection laws in each of the countries, and make sure that before you build up any kind of an IT system, that you are compliant and you have taken all the necessary permissions, etc., from the local authorities or the people concerned. So there are countries within Africa, Middle East, and Asia Pacific where you have a requirement for taking express permission from the authority, unless you are taking your data to a specific list of countries that the authority has specified. So, for example, in Morocco, if you are taking away the personal data of an employee outside of Morocco, you need to make sure that you take permission from the authority, because they have a list of countries which is expressly mostly European countries where you can transfer the data. So with remote working, with payroll happening online, with attendance happening online, with a lot of collaboration with clients happening online, a lot of this data needs to be shifted out, needs to be shifted to the data centers. But before you do that, one needs to make sure that you are compliant with the local law.
If you could also share some insight with respect to compliances with GDPR in the region with respect to EU nationals' data.
If there are any European nationals involved that are in your region. So there is no such strict compliance with GDPR that we need to do as an organization when we're looking at data protection compliances. Of course, there are individuals from the EU that may be there within the region, but then with their express permission, you can, make sure that you are compliant with the data protection laws. But overall, I don't think any organization that's looking at a very comprehensive data protection compliance program needs to be as worried about compliances with GDPR. Instead, their focus has to be on the compliance with the local data protection laws, unless it is some sort of an organization that is extensively working with EU nationals in the region. So yes, it is the strictest. Yes, we have to worry about it, but it is not an immediate headache when we're looking at data protection compliances in this region.
Finally, Ojasvita, if you could guide us on the methods of compliances followed by different companies for data protection.
It's the three-step process that you need to look at when you're looking at data protection compliances in the region. First of all, there is a need to study what are the data protection laws and requirements on data protection laws in each of the local countries where you are operating. So every country has their own data protection laws. It's important to understand what is sensitive personal data, what is personal data, what is allowed to be transferred outside the country in that particular jurisdiction, what sort of consequences are there for non-compliance, etc. On the second step, you would have to look at what are the laws in the place where your data center is located, where you're basically processing all the data or collecting all the data or accessing the data. So those sort of aspects need to be looked at. And then finally, I think everything said and done, it's important to have a comprehensive review of your internal processes as far as access to data protection or any kind of data is concerned. So it's not very difficult to be compliant with data protection laws in the region because pretty much the principles are equally applicable. There are different laws and there are different punishments and there are different definitions of what is allowed or what is called as personal data and what is not called personal data. But how you can access it, who can access it, those sort of basic requirements, basic policies can be uniform across the region. So how well you can protect your personal data, who can access it, with what permissions, with what level of authority. I think once those three things are taken care of, you can have a very robust and a very compliant data protection policy in place. As far as Indian law is evolving and the other laws, are already there is the amount of penalty that is involved. I think we don't have as strict or as high penalties in India. So even if a company is found violating, there's a give and take. I don't think it's a very strict law for which anybody is going to worry about, unless there are going to be changes or there's going to be an increased amount. The reason why GDPR is very effective, and the reason why GDPR is everybody is following it, is because of the high level of penalties that are there on it. So that is another aspect, I think, when we're talking about data protection laws evolving in India. It's an interesting thing to look at.
That really helps, ma'am. Thank you. So it was really nice talking to you. Anything concluding that you would want to speak on data protection law, a guide or something, for our audience?
As far as data protection is concerned, firstly, it's very important to understand that it is very much a very important aspect of your policy making. We are past that era when you can ignore compliance with data protection laws. Given that we have very robust data protection policies, laws, and very heavy penalties for non-compliance, it is very much a focus, and should be a focus for all organizations that are dealing with any sort of data. Secondly, given that we are moving more towards remote working because of COVID, and a lot of data is being collected from a different source, being stored in a different source, and being accessed from multiple sources, because people are located across the world and people are working remotely. It is all the more important to understand what are the laws involved, what are the compliances as per those particular local laws involved, and then to come up with a single policy that is so robust that you are compliant with almost all the local laws. One easy way of doing that is to make sure that you're compliant with GDPR, because that is probably the most stringent, the most stringent data protection law in the world. So if you are compliant with the basic principles of GDPR, you can be safely, within the ambits of all the local data protection laws. So I think those are the 3 points that I would like to conclude with on this discussion on data protection laws.
Thank you, ma'am. This one really helps.